Now that you've found UBN Radio and discovered our quality talk shows, it's time to spread the word to friends, family, and the universe. 24 hours of music and talk. Radio without limits. That's why people keep coming back for more. That's UBNradio.com.
And greetings and salutations, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to Dr. Judy WTF here on UBN Radio Network. I'm your host, Walt Lusk, and of course, Dr. Judy Rosenberg, clinical psychologist and founder of the Psychological Healing Center in Beverly Hills, Sherman Oaks, California, and of course, all over the world, and where you can hear our voices. This is a call-in show, by the way. Oh, I should get into WTF. WTF is What the Freud, and we have a pretty little interesting show today.
I didn't know that's what it was.
Well, sometimes it's What the Film, because we
true.
shrink movies, and we're gonna we also shrink songs, which we're gonna do an interesting song later in the show about what we're gonna talk about, which is basically prison and Passover. So we're going to use that as a sort of a metaphor, right? Escaping the psychological prisons many of us are in, and some of us don't even know it. But you can catch us on iTunes. We are a proud new member of the iHeart family, and YouTube and iTunes as well, and Stitcher. So what's going on, Doctor?
Well, a lot is going on, and for those of you who've been listening to the show, I think that you get the idea that we work with a mind map that I created for healing human disconnect, and I want to lay out the mind map because today we're going to trace how we get into psychological prison in the first place, and then we're going to talk about how to get out of jail.
Yes, we are. And
and we're using Passover. I'm using Passover as a metaphor because thousands of years ago, the story goes that the Jews were slaves to the Egyptians, and during this period of time, they escaped from the confines of the system that Pharaoh created
in Egypt.
Yes. And so I'm using it because it's that time of year as a metaphor for escaping from our own psychological prison, because on some level we're all in it, whether it be that we're really, really trapped in there and we have no exit door, something that I refer to as the double dungeon of darkness, which I will elaborate on in more detail. But in essence, I want to lay out the foundation of the mind map, because whether you suffer from depression or anxiety, or you're suffering because you are trapped in a defense mechanism like overeating or using drugs or gambling. It's a psychological jail that creates a lot of pain and suffering for us. And until we learn how to break free from our symptoms, we're really going to be run by them, and we're going to be at the effect of them. And the purpose of this discussion tonight is for you to learn how to be the cause of better outcomes for your life, and to be the cause of allowing yourself to have a pathway out from this emotional prison that we are all on some level in.
And Judy is also the author of the book entitled Be the Cause, Healing Human Disconnect, for those of you that can see it on YouTube. And you can find it on Amazon in paperback and, of course, on Kindle. And if you want to look at the mind map and you're listening, you can go to drjudywtf.com and check it out.
And we are a call-in show, so
yes,
please
we
do
are.
call
and
in.
You
We
can get on
love
the
call-ins.
couch, and we really would like to hear from you, especially if you can call us from prison. And the number is area code 323.
Are they allowed to call from prison?
Yes.
They are.
Collect.
Really?
Yes. 323-843-2826. That's area code 323-843-2826. Sorry, we can't accept collect calls. So
It'd be interesting to receive some calls from prison, actually.
Well, and if
maybe
you have
we'll arrange to have that done.
I
at some
have an
point
article
soon.
of someone who actually spent time in prison for 6 months, and he learned a lot. And we're going to elaborate that as the show unfolds.
Okay.
About the physical aspects of prison, and there's obviously more type, but the which we'll get into in a moment or two. But the mind map is a system that Dr. Judy developed over a dozen years ago, and it is a 9-panel system. And the first 3 panels really deal with your past. The next 3 panels deal with your future, and of course, subsequent. The last 3 panels deal with no. The first 3 is your past, your present, and the last 3 with your future. I get it right.
Right.
I need more mind mapping.
It's okay. You're going to get it tonight. So we're going to trace the steps of this lockdown, so to speak. And
A mental
ironically,
lockdown.
yeah. And I just, ironically, as I was writing the notes to you, I opened up my mail and I received a piece of mail from an acquaintance of mine that is now in prison. And actually, it was very, very touching for me because obviously he's got the darkness and the light. And this particular gentleman, I won't use his name in public, suffered a lot. And he had a very, very bad panel 1, which means lots of wounds of childhood, alcoholism, and just a lot of abandonment issues and so on and so forth. And so it's not surprising that when people don't have the first few years of life of nurturance and, and unconditional love and families that blueprint mental health into the fiber of a person's being, that they break down later in life and that they sometimes project these feelings on other human beings and end up in prison, literally end up in prison. So
Didn't this gentleman end up primarily in kind of sort of debtor's prison or something? He hadn't paid child support or something?
Yeah, unfortunately.
crazy.
And, the thing is that I believe that when people begin to own their own
Stuff.
their own actions, own their own stuff, they begin to heal. And the letter was really about owning his own stuff. And he really touched me tonight because he was talking about how the mind map helps him every day in prison and how it connects him to source energy and God, and how through connecting with a higher power, he's able to still keep growing and still keep on keeping on and see the light at the end of the tunnel. And it must not be easy for somebody to be incarcerated and live in darkness. And knowing him, though, he's probably spreading the light to a lot of people within the prison confines. So you can see how that when you don't have a great family of origin and a great past, you become psychologically injured. And so if you put up the panels, I can go through the system, and for those of you watching, you can follow along. And for those of you who don't know, I have a book called Be the Cause: Healing Human Disconnect, which is available through my website, Dr. Judy WTF, or on Amazon and book version, Kindle version, and you're free to download it and then get the system really, really ingrained into your thinking process. So let me know when the panels are there. There we go. They're up there. Okay, so the top part of the mind map represents the wounds of childhood. The middle represents the chaos and breakdowns of today. And then the bottom half represents the morphing out and the escape from psychological prison, if you will. So let's turn to panel 1, which is the first panel. And you can see in panel 1 that there's lots of light and there's lots of darkness.
Lots of darkness.
And the lots of light represents our true essence, our soul, our unblemished psyche, if you will, our innocence, our blank slate state. Okay, so panel 1 represents that we are born into this world really with no what I call psychological wounds. We're just born, and then the rest is up to how we are treated. Now, you will also see the little black marks on panel 1, which represents the wounds of childhood. And just so that you can understand what those wounds are, they have to do with verbal abuse, physical abuse, smothering, sexual abuse, and neglect. Okay, so when we are treated in a way that hurts our psyche, we will no longer be that blank slate state. And because we are infants, we soak in the experiences, and these experiences infiltrate. I call it, they infiltrate into the fiber of our being, and they create, I use my own terminology here, they create what I call psychoviruses. So psychological viruses that make us psycho, literally. So how does it happen that we get imprisoned? So we get imprisoned because we're wounded. And when we're wounded, we as children have reactions to that wound. And so if you move to panel 2, you will see that the reactions to the wound are demonstrated, or rather graphically demonstrated, by a kind of a shattering. So when we're born, we're more or less whole and complete. Then we're wounded, and this wounding shatters our psyche and shatters our emotions and shatters our experience of the world. And so that what happens to us is we have a cracked lens of perception on life, so that we're no longer seeing straight. So we no longer see ourselves clearly. We no longer see the world clearly. And so the template is broken and everything is thrown off. The problem is that when we're wounded, what we see is, we think it is reality.
Well, I always say the perception is reality. So as you talk about seeing things through the cracked lens of perception, we've learned that if it's our perception, it becomes our reality, and we need to change the lens which we see life through and change our perception.
Yeah, and we can't just change it. It's not like putting on a new pair of glasses. Like, sorry, let's just shift the filters here and shift the, the 20, 50 to whatever. It's not quite like that. We have to go back into the wounds of childhood, re-experience the emotions, reprocess the emotions so that we could reboot out. But you can see that when we're wounded, it definitely cracks our lens of perception. And let me give you some examples from case studies as to what happens during this period of time. What happens is that in our primitive brain, the amygdala, we have reactions to these wounds. And on a primitive level, and I mean pre-verbal level, this is before you're able to speak, okay? So this is not an intellectualized kind of experience.
No,
it's more
usually
like
the first, at least the first year of life.
Yeah, the first few months, first year or so of life, we're having very, very primal reactions to being wounded. Either we're feeling anxious, or we start shutting down, or we start feeling like our stomachs are hurting, or our other parts of our body start tensing up. And
so we have a physical manifestation.
Very much so. Okay. So the mind and the body are interconnected, and so what happens is, just like primal reactions, where we're responding to the treatment that is bestowed on us. And some of the treatment, if not so good, will put us into this very, very harmful and reactive mode that then starts infiltrating into our musculature, and neurons are going to be firing in response to this kind of treatment, and everything's going to be going pretty awry here. So what happens out of that is that we start encoding this information. And during this encoding period, we start becoming cognitive. So in other words, the thoughts now start coming online, so to speak. And so we start processing the information. The problem is that infants are very egocentric, meaning they see the world through the lens of me, me, me. And usually it's from the perspective of, it's all my fault. Everything is all my fault.
Well, that's a little bit of expansion of me, me, me. It's me and about me and my fault.
Right. So if I'm anxious, then it's all my fault. If I'm depressed, it's because I did something bad. If I'm anxious, I also might have done something bad. If I'm not feeling well, it's because maybe I don't deserve to feel well, and it's just not a good. It's not a good blueprinting here. And so this blueprinting is really the lockdown of that psychological prison. So if you look at the panel 3 as bars, prison bars, then you can see that when things don't go well with mom, things don't go well with dad, when the reactions are over the top and very disturbing, when the treatment is very disturbing, the reactions will be very disturbing.
You
And
think?
so everything begins to lock down on this person. And so let me just relate some case studies because I think that's very relevant. So one of the typical lockdowns that occurs is feelings of paranoia. Okay, so if the world is not safe, if mom and dad didn't provide safety to an infant, then the worldview of that infant is that I'm not safe, so that everything is processed through these paranoid bars. And so the person will see the world as unsafe. So what they will typically do is project on other people like, hey, why did you look at me that way? Why did you talk to me that way? And so it becomes a really messy dynamics between people because you're just sitting there with the person, and all of a sudden you're feeling this shift in energy, and you're feeling this shift in vibes, and you're wondering, well, why is that person responding to me that way? I didn't do anything. Well, most likely you didn't do anything. But the point is that because their lens of perception is cracked, right?
All they're seeing is through that particular perception,
Right.
and they're going to interpret everything that they experience
Right.
through those lenses, and therefore it validates in their misperceived mind that what they perceive is true because they see it that way.
Absolutely, Walt. And then guess what happens to the relationship between that person and the person that they're sitting across from?
It's probably going to get a little messed up.
It's a total disconnect,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Because if they think that you don't like them, but you haven't thought anything of the sort, but they think you don't like them, then they're already suspicious and they're already feeling upset at your presence. It's an automatic disconnect. So can you see how the psychological prison warps the entire perception of a human being and locks them down in this psychological place where everything is misperceived?
And the earlier this perception is created and the longer it exists,
Right.
the worse it becomes, because all this other data, if you will, that we interact with people in life and stuff,
Yes.
is going to validate the wound, and it's just going to become a bigger wound and more validated.
And then it starts reverberating so that it's not only between the person and the perceiver, it becomes the view of the world, and it becomes the view of the workplace. We've talked about healing corporate disconnects. So all of a sudden their peers don't really like them, and they're having problems with their boss, and they're having problems on a more of a macro scale. And then if you expand this thing out, it becomes very macro, because then we are disenfranchised from countries, from different religions, different political points of views, and we're fractured as a human race, which is how this whole concept got started in my head, that we have fractured into what I call isms of theology, isms of race, isms of
Gender now.
of everything,
Yeah.
everything. Okay.
And Judy's book, of course, is Healing Human Disconnect, Be the Cause, Healing Human Disconnect. And Judy and I believe that we as individuals, we as families, we as lovers, we as couples, we as employees, we as a
Right.
nation are more disconnected from each other than ever. Classic example, go to a restaurant, and what do you see with everybody sitting down? All they're doing is staring at their cell phones and not even interacting and looking into the eyes of the person across the table.
I had the privilege of hearing a lecture by a chiropractor who's very versed in neurology, and he was talking about tumors in cell phones and how dangerous they are, and that sometimes they've picked up on tumors that are in the shape of the cell phone.
Oh my Lord!
Actually,
Yeah.
So it's so dangerous. It's one of the most disconnecting items on the planet today. Computers, cell phones, so on. They're just
Well, I was just reading an article
human
before the show
disconnect.
started about the fact that your cell phone's a GPS, and GPS is an incredibly integral part of our life now. I mean, you can't even drive anywhere anymore without using GPS and drive yourself into lakes and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But even that being radiated by all that, let alone what Wi-Fi and everything else, isn't healthy. And I know that in basically the booklets of our cell phones is an explanation of the fact that maybe you want to have this thing slammed to your head or in your pocket.
Right.
And one person said, well, if it's in the booklet and it's in the box, let's take that phrase and put it on the outside of the box and blow it up. And as you can well imagine, the cell phone industry had a conniption fit and got it stopped. So,
they
yeah,
don't
it's
want us
crazy
to
stuff.
know this information. So the disconnect just reverberates not only on an individual level and between people, but then it grows mushrooms into communities, and then it mushrooms into a worldwide disconnect, which will one day be my last and final book, Healing Global Disconnect. There, I said it. But I'm not ready to write that. Although I've written most of it.
Say, you've started
and,
it.
I sure did. I started that before Healing Human Disconnect. But I went micro. So I went micro because you can see how when we're not healed on a micro level, we're not going to do well on a macro level.
No,
and
we're
so
not.
when we're disconnected from ourselves, we're going to disconnect from everybody else. So it just makes sense to start the healing process that way. So let's talk a little bit about the wounds of childhood. If you don't mind, maybe you can read a little bit of an excerpt from my book, Be the Cause.
I'd love to.
Sure.
Where shall I start?
Page
Doctor?
30. How about that?
Page 30. Okay.
Let's start with the wounds.
So page 30, and those of you that have the book, I have one right here. It looks like that. Creation from the problem, encoding your past. Panel 1 is the wound, the original disconnect between mother and infant. On the mind map, it is represented by the image of the Big Bang or the first cause. This is the first representation of duality, our darkness and our light, and the introduction into the psyche of our first needs, unfulfilled, first struggles, disappointments, first sensations of self and others.
Thank you,
Panel
Walt.
1.
Okay, so if we are born into the world and we are then not welcome into the world because mom isn't emotionally available, or mom is emotionally available, but she is herself unable to provide other areas of mental health, like consistency. Okay, because she's interrupted because she has other children to care for. It creates a problem.
Or, as you said, the husband is the father is supposed to nurture the nurturer.
Right.
Which is, of course, his
That's
mom.
the next thing. Okay.
Yeah.
So what does it take to form a healthy human psyche? We know the rap: eye contact, skin contact, breastfeeding, stay-at-home moms, at least for the first year, 2, 3 of life. That would be nice. It would be super wonderful if our communities, our government supported mothers so that they could stay at home and not have to enter the workplace for at least a year. That would change the mental health of our nation.
Order.
Right? That's a tall order.
Yeah, it's a
so that's
tall
not happening anytime soon. I think it does happen in other countries, right? They have a lot better care. So you can begin to see that if we don't get these emotional ingredients for mental health, then there goes that first door of the double dungeon of darkness. Now, the father, as you were saying, gets to mitigate the damages if he can and he's able. Now, if he's able to nurture the mother, if he's able to provide for the family, then she's in a better situation to be that nurturer, because it's a trickle down, it's a system. So he brings home the goodies, and she can relax and not have to work, and he can rub her shoulders if she gets tired, and he can be there for her when she's exhausted from the breastfeeding or the crying. And so the more he nurtures her, the more she has to give to her infant. So can you see how the father can open the double dungeon of darkness and let in some light?
Well, I've seen instances where, the husband wants to step in and, honey, go for a walk, go take a bath or
Right.
whatever. But, mom says, you don't know my children that well, and I don't trust you with my children even for a couple of hours, even though I'm going to be upstairs and you're hanging out with them downstairs. And it just perpetuates itself. And dad is sometimes excluded from the whole thing, and it just mushrooms as time goes by.
So let's put some juice into this. Now, let's say the father was not raised with a father. Let's say he was raised by his mother and he doesn't really know how to be a father.
Mm-hmm.
So where is he supposed to get the skills to be a father? Okay, unless he had a wonderful uncle or older brother, so on and so forth, doesn't have the skills to do that.
I can give you a personal example.
Sure.
I have 2 daughters, and I was going to put a onesie on my daughter when she was just a tiny infant. And, I just never played with Barbies or G.I. Joes or anything.
Not even G.I. Joes?
Not even G.I. Joes.
I'm shocked.
So I'm sitting there with this 4 things that are sticking out. I'm supposed to put the feet in the arms in the arms. And, of course, I didn't do it right. It was like, oh, this is kind of funny.
Yeah.
So I figured it out pretty quick. But, I had never dressed a doll before, and now I had a live body sitting there trying to put something on her. It was
But
pretty
you
funny.
had a father, and you had a father who
did.
was a provider and part of the family. So you had a father role model. Many people today, the divorce rate is up, and many people grow up without a father. And we've had shows on what not having a father does to both males and females. So you can see how if the father didn't have a role model, he's less likely to be able to mitigate the damages.
Because, again, we talk about multi-generational. If dad didn't learn how to be a dad,
Right.
and he doesn't know how or doesn't take the effort to learn, then it's just going to fall, and then it's just going to fall and duplicate itself in the next generation.
So let's take a look beyond the lens of the obvious, and let's say mom is available, but emotionally she's not really available. Let's say, for example, and I see this in my practice, mom is extremely depressed, or mom is a secret alcoholic, and so she's not really all that available to be emotionally there for her child. So what does that do to the psyche of that baby? So can you begin to see how the health of the parents is really necessary for the babies and the children to have a good shot at mental health? So one of the things that I emphasize in my practice is that for those of you who are not parents yet, it's vital that you heal your own wounds of childhood, because if you don't heal these wounds, they definitely pass on down generation to generation.
Whether you want it to or not, it's just going to happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Dr. Murray
unfortunately.
Bowen talks about the multigenerational transmission process, and he talked about how each generation was just going to break down a little bit more until people are just going to fall into the deep, dark hole of depression and dissociative disorders and not really have the mental capacity to carry on. And of course, we're seeing this more and more on a large scale basis. We've talked about alcoholism on some shows. We've talked about narcissistic parents who are not able to put their children first. And so this is what I mean by the prisoners of childhood, because childhood is a
hostage situation. And my
sure
other line I
is.
always use is raising parents is really hard work, but childhood really is a hostage situation, and it's not a picnic for mom and dad, nor is it a picnic for the kids either.
Not always. And
No.
sometimes the hostage situation isn't exactly all negative, because a hostage situation can also mean benevolent hostage situation, in that you give your children boundaries and you tell them to do their homework and you give them rules and so on, and give them a feeling of containment so that they have to be home on time and so on. So that's a little bit of
Boundaries.
a positive
boundaries.
hostage situation. But
Yep.
the other kind of hostage situation is if you're being beaten, abused, ignored, and so on, then, you don't get to say, hey, Mom, Dad, I don't like this. I'm switching parents, or, I don't like this. Go get help, because chances are they're not going to get help.
I'm going to run away from home.
Right. I'm going to run away from home. One of the beautiful parts of my work is doing mother-daughter, mother-child healings. And I love this because as of late, I've been doing more and more of this, where the mother comes in, and now the fathers are coming in too to help their children heal, whether the child is a young child or whether the child is an adult child. And through their taking responsibility for being agents of cause in the damaging of their children, the adult child or the child is able to really experience for the first time watching their parents take responsibility for their part of the chaos and damage in their life.
And we must add that this truly is not a situation where we're shaming or blaming or demoralizing. Mom and Dad did the best they could with the tools they did or didn't have.
Right.
And it's just a matter of the fact that, it just didn't work out. And it's trying to put the pieces back together again. And in many instances, the pieces can be put back together again if you decide to, go through the effort and invest in yourself to do that.
And since the book has been out, Walt, do you know that mothers and fathers are more courageous to do this type of work? Because I have a case study in my book that I call Black Rose's Mother's Day.
Yes.
And then the reparative piece, which is called White Rose's Mother's Day, where this kind of a processing occurs between the parent and the child. And it's a beautiful way for people to be let out of psychological prison. That is one of the most powerful ways they can, by going back to cause and in a therapeutic setting, know how to process the feelings so that they're no longer holding them. Do we have a caller?
No, I was going to say, you just tuned into Dr. Judy WTF, which is What the Freud here on UBN Radio Network. I'm your host, Walt Lusk, and of course, Dr. Judy Rosenberg. We're talking about psychological prison today, and how we get in it, and we're going to talk some issues and possibly help you get out of it. And if you want to get on the couch with Dr. Judy with your prisoner or emotional ouch, you can call us at area code 323-843-2826. And you can catch all our shows on iHeartRadio, Stitcher, iTunes, and here at UBN Radio.
Thank you. And we now have an app for the
Yes,
iPhones.
Psychological Healing Center on your iPhone. So if you're listening to this on your phone, just go over to the App Store and download the Psychological Healing Center app. And those of you who have Androids will be coming out soon.
And if you are long distance, then either
telephone or Skype,
or my interns, my psychological assistants and interns conduct these psychoeducational mind map courses that are psychoeducational and therapeutic in nature. And we have people who reach out to us from different parts of the world. Some people actually fly in to do the therapy. And our goal is to get people in and out of therapy as quickly as possible so that they don't have to stay in therapy for years and just basically self-infect their own pain. And I'm not a big fan of talk therapy that goes something like, and how does that make you feel? You mentioned
your parents.
Right. So you can now begin to see this lockdown and this psychological prison. And so let's talk a little bit about how to get out. Now, one way to get out is to be a courageous parent and come in with your child and process these feelings with your child. And if you've done that, I really, really, really respect and commend you, because it is not easy work. There's lots of Kleenex on my table when we do that kind of work. And actually, I have found that when parents are courageous enough to come in and own their own piece in the damage of their own children, they not only heal the child, but they heal that piece of themselves that always knew that it was not okay. And so they walk out of the session more whole and complete as well.
Well, as a metaphor, I thought we would dive into someone who spent 6 months in prison, and he learned a lot. And I thought, and what's interesting is he was upper middle class, and he actually did upper middle class kind of crime. He stole some intellectual property, and got in trouble for it. So he spent 6 months in prison, and it was a really interesting experience for him. And he said, basically, I learned not just how to survive in prison, but how to survive as a man, as an individual. And there's 5 things that he learned. I thought we could apply this.
Please.
First is letting go, right? You're sitting in prison. They control everything. When you get up, when you go to bed, what you eat, when you eat, what you can do. You're kind of literally at their mercy. And he says, everyday life is filled with attachments to things, people, and perceptions. Letting go is often one of the hardest challenges to face in life. Validation, affection, and approval are hard to abandon, but mental toughness is letting go, relinquishing and giving away all the things the ego would like to attach to it. He says there's no clocks in prison, and sometimes 10 minutes feels like an hour.
That's intense.
Very much so.
Yeah.
You're pretty much there by yourself. It's easy to tell when an inmate has let go. His face is calm, his breath is full, and smiles and laughter were always close by. We have control of ourselves and our actions, but the world and our surroundings are largely outside of our power. Just like if we're in prison, right? Everything is not in their control at all. We have little control of our external world at all. So you have to let go.
So that's another pathway out of psychological prison, is letting go. And for those of you who don't know, the mind map is a psycho-spiritual model as well. And the psycho-spiritual aspect of it is that above and beyond the damage that our parents inflict on us is a source bigger than ourselves. Some people like to call it universal truth. Atheists alike, agnostics alike, religious and spiritual people, doesn't matter. When we recognize that we're not we're not the end-all and the be-all, that we are interconnected intricately, that there is a higher power above and beyond who we are, then we can tap into that higher power. And just to make things simple, one of the ways of getting out of psychological prison is to follow the truth light. Because what happens at the causal level is, as you know, it cracks our lens of perception, and then we buy into a bunch of lies. These lies are our negative core beliefs that we've talked about. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not lovable. I'm not competent, and so on and so forth. And so when we shine the truth light on the cause of all of this mess, then we really begin to dissolve the lies. I'm working with a young man as we speak who was very criticized by his family of origin. And so he is super self-conscious of everything, questions everything. And it's really, really torturous for him.
It sounds like everything hits a nerve.
Everything hits a nerve.
That's
and
no
so
picnic.
the questioning just doesn't end. And now he's finally beginning to see the truth, which is that the cause of all of this was his family of origin. Of course they were the cause, because he wasn't born to question everything. I mean, normal questioning I love. It's a Socratic method. But when you question everything, you question your intelligence, and you question your abilities, and you question your sexuality, and you question everything about yourself, it can become pretty annoying and pretty stressful, to say the least.
Well, next time you see him, just ask him, why is the sky blue?
Why is the sky blue?
Yeah, I got that a lot with my daughters.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Next is self-acceptance. The acceptance of what is the precondition of change. Denial leaves us stuck. Acceptance is the high part of healing and growing. Being aware of the emotions that cause improper actions and accepting them is one of the most important steps. Men who accept their faults were the ones who seemed less likely to commit immoral acts and become free from incarceration.
And I think the 12th step follows
It does. A higher power of will.
higher power
Sure.
and taking inventory, which is owning your own stuff. And these aspects will be ways that we can get out of psychological jail, because part of it is that when we become psychologically damaged like that, we become ill, and so as a result, sometimes our morals get thrown out the window, our ethics get thrown out the window, and so as a result of narcissistic injuries, we start taking things that don't belong to us because we feel entitled, and those are just examples of how morals ethics can get corrupted, and so as a result of that, we may end up in actual prison. So it's not just a psychological prison; it's an actual prison.
Yes.
And by the way, I just wanted to mention I did write a book with actually it was with a ghostwriter, because I don't write novels, but
that's right.
I themed a book that I got help writing, and it's called Lucid Darkness, and it's an amazing book because the character is about fictional version of me, a psychologist who created a mind map for healing human disconnect and ends up in prison and has to use her own mind map to escape from her actual prison.
And it's available on Amazon.
Yes.
Yeah, so just look up Lucid Darkness or Dr. Judy Rosenberg.
Lucid Darkness in Kindle version.
Kindle only.
$4.99.
As a friend of mine would say, it's a bargain at twice the price. And third, we talked interesting about taking responsibility is take responsibility.
Right.
Other people dictate a prisoner's life, as I said. The people you sleep next to, the work you do, the schedule you follow, the food you eat are all out of your control. Gee, it sounds like a lot of people's lives that are out of prison.
Right.
Despite that, there are always a responsible to self. There's always responsibility to yourself to grow as a human and strive to something greater. What's the best use of your time and what enriches your life the most? Sometimes it might be to relax and enjoy the relationship and the presence of those you have around you.
So I just wanted to read a little bit from panel 2.
Okay.
And panel 2 is the reaction to the wound that I was talking about. And I love this quote. It's by Mitch Albom. All parents damage their children. It cannot be helped. Youth, like pristine glass, absorbs the prints of its handlers. Some parents smudge, others crack. A few shatter childhoods completely into jagged little pieces beyond repair. As you learned in the last panel, when our basic physical and emotional needs are not met in a reasonable time frame, a state of physical and emotional imbalance is created within us. Without the capacity to self-soothe, we react to the wounds of these unmet needs with significant distress. So if our caregivers don't know how to attune to us, if we don't know how to self-soothe because we're sponges, we need others outside of ourselves to regulate us. As infants, we cannot self-regulate.
We learn a lot by watching.
Well, not only that, but when our parents when mother breastfeeds, eye contact, skin contacts, then our physiology starts calming down. And we learn how to have that inner strength that is necessary to weather the storms of our chaotic lives.
Next, it talks about when we learned in prison was being emotional and authentic with those around you. Being emotional and open is okay and actually healthy. I've learned there's no reason why these emotions shouldn't also be prevalent in the free world and with men or women of those around that I love. And this next one I love, which I think is a huge impact, is have an attitude of gratitude for others. In prison, there's a lot of time to think. And, for family and friends who are free, the world keeps moving. It moves at a pace that is incomprehensible to someone who is incarcerated because, you're not getting a newspaper every day. Maybe you're not watching the news. You don't know what's going on. Right. So, you got to have a sort of a attitude of gratitude, a strong, write some letters, heartfelt letters, just express yourself and really be gratitude for, the bed you're sleeping in, the house you're in, the food you're eating. It's amazing how that will, really turn your attitude around a lot.
Right. When you're in that double dungeon of darkness, whether it be a psychological one or a psychological one and an imprisoned situation, we need to find the light. And sometimes finding the light means the little things. Having a conversation with somebody right next to you, having a sense of authenticity between two human beings. I'm unfortunately watching a very dear friend go through stage 4 cancer, and what do we have at the end of our lives? It's just really about connection and about love and about being able to be there for another human being and just sit and listen. There's not much that I can say to this person, especially when he's going through intense pain, but one thing that I can do is just put my hands on his forehead or just hold his hands or just be there and have him say whatever's on his mind or just cry.
It's really all about relationships, folks.
Right.
You know, last I checked, hearses don't pull U-Hauls. It's not about stuff. It's about family, friends, and hanging out with those you love and impacting those around you in a real way and being true, real, gratitude, and authentic.
So I know we have the shrink the tune time. Yeah,
Yes.
Is it that time?
The clock is a tyrant, Dr.
Okay,
Judy.
so just one last
and
comment.
you know what? We've got, we've got
have
a call.
In? Go for it.
Okay.
A 2-minute call.
Hi, you're on the couch with Dr. Judy, and you've got just a couple of minutes here. Thanks for calling.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question. This is Susan.
Hi,
Hi,
Susan.
Susan.
Hi. When you finish the program, are you always going to have the triggers and the core? Are you always going to have to fight it?
Not the same way that it lies in you unconsciously. You'll always be conscious of it. When you finish the mind map course, which I know we've been talking about, what will happen is that you'll be able to source it. And instead of feeling that you are your negative core belief, you'll be able to see that it was born out of something that had nothing to do with you. And then you'll reprocess the feelings back to cause. You won't own it anymore, Susan. It's not yours to begin with. Okay? Does that make sense?
I think so. So I'll recognize it like when it hits. You know, I'll be like, oh, okay, wait a minute.
It doesn't belong to you, but more than that, you'll see we're going to process those emotions. I know we're just about out of time.
We are, and you know what? In her book,
Right.
if you haven't gotten "Be the Cause: Healing Human Disconnect," in the back of every section is called "Think Like a Shrink," and what that really does is summarizes and give you tools for you to realize what's going on and how to really deal with it on your own.
And I'd love to have you back on the show
Yeah,
after you've completed your mind map
Sure.
therapy,
We'd
and
love
then
to have
you
you
tell
back.
us what happened to your negative core
Yeah.
belief, okay?
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay.
All right.
Have a good night. Thanks for calling.
All right, thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you for calling. Good night. Okay, so
Okay.
I know we're shrinking that tune.
Shrink that tune.
Go ahead.
So this is a song called "Time to Go Inward," and it's by Rodney Crowell. It is time to go inward, take a look at myself. Time to make the most of the time that I've got left. Prison bars imagined are no less solid steel. Time to go inward, you believe that I'm afraid. To stare down the barrel of choices that I've made. The ghost of bad decisions make mountains out of everything I feel.
So this is a person, obviously, that is trapped in a kind of a prison of the past or some kind of prison. And as I was saying, the best way to do this is to self-reflect. So he's going inward, and it's not fun to make to stare at a barrel of choices that hurt him in his lifetime.
Yeah, it's not fun. Outside my window, the wind weaves a path through the trees. The moon takes a shine to the shadows that fall on the leaves. It's time to go inward. I don't know if I can do it after all that I've become. I've been a fool for money, but it's vanity that always leaves me flat.
So he's identifying his ego, the vanity and so on, that didn't really do much for him. And he's not sure that he can really go inward because he's still attached to things. And
well, it's tough to let go. It's time to go inward, man. I hope I have the nerve to take an inventory of the causes that I serve. They say a man without a conscience is like a man without a country, or something like that. It's time to go inward, time to be still. If I don't do it now, I don't believe I ever will. My mind is like a chatterbox whose noise pollutes the pathways to my soul.
Yeah, and all of that chattering is about the negative core beliefs, a lot of that chattering. And so he's got to go look at himself now. It sounds almost like this person may be dying, too, whoever wrote the song. Sounds
Never
like
know.
Writing about a dying man. Go ahead.
Time to go inward, time to get a grip. Time to put an end to one long bad acid trip. I'm out of excuses for the way I've let my choices take a toll. Jesus and Buddha and Krishna and Minnie Pearl knew, do unto others the things you want done unto you.
So maybe he is coming out of a 12-step here, and he's taking inventory, and he sees that the most important thing is to be a good human being and to do unto others.
And lastly, time to go inward, time to look at me. Try to make some sense of life's illusions that I see. Try to solve the riddle of what it is I have to offer to the world.
That's beautiful because he used the truth lens to go inward and tell the truth. And out of that, he began to see what his value is, not only to himself, but what he can offer the world, which is about the best way that you can get yourself out of psychological prison, is to be the cause of not only better outcomes for your life, but better outcomes for other people's lives as well.
Couldn't have said it better. Thanks so much for tuning in and watching to Dr. Judy WTF. You can check us out at iHeartRadio and, of course, Stitcher, iTunes, and here at UBN Radio Network. You can write us if you'd like our notes or even suggestions for a song to shrink or want some information at info@drjudywtf.com. I'm your host, Walt Lusk, and, of course, Dr. Judy Rosenberg. Until next time, God bless everyone. Thanks so much.